Hi everyone, welcome to the English Speaking Skills Enhancement module, which its objective is to help students to improve their communication skills. I'm Miss Shikin, one of the instructors for this module, and I will share with you my knowledge in making oral commentary on characters in a movie. So you can see the title is on the slide. Before I proceed with our first lesson, let me ask you a simple question. Do you think that making comments will help you to improve your communication skills? To acquire a language, learners need to practice the language, and making comments on a movie is a practice that is easy, simple, and interesting. Don't you think so? However, to give good comments, learners need to have a good analysis of the content so that the comments can be supported with good evidence based on what learners watch. Therefore, this module will provide simple and interesting strategies for learners to present their comments on a movie. There are 3 lesson outcomes for this topic. So, by the end of the lesson, in this first video, learners should be able to identify the types of characters in a movie. For the second video, by the end of the lesson, learners should be able to identify the traits in characters and also to make comments on a character. Let me give an overview of this lesson. There are 4 steps in making comments on a character. The first step is to know the type of characters that can be seen in a movie. The types will be based on the role that the character plays in a movie. For this lesson, 5 types of characters will be shared. The second step is to select one character so that it is easier for the learners to focus on their comments. The third step is to know which trait or traits the character has. And the fourth step is to learn how to make comments on a character. Let's begin with the first step, in which learners should know the types of characters in a movie. As I mentioned earlier, 5 main types of characters will be discussed. Who are the 5 main types of movie characters that I will share? They are protagonist, antagonist, love interest, deuteragonist, and mentor. Are all the terms familiar to you? If they are not, don't worry. I will explain the 5 main types of movie characters in the next slides. Let's start with the most important character, which is the protagonist. Do you know that the concept of a protagonist comes from an ancient Greek drama? It is, and the term originally meant the player of the first part of the chief actor. The protagonist is the lead character who moves the story forward. The protagonist is always the main character who is introduced at the beginning of a movie with a goal that will be or will not be achieved at the end of the movie. There are 3 types of protagonists. So the first one is known as lonely hero. So this type of protagonist is the one and only hero who could solve the conflict at the end of the movie. Let me give you an example. Right, let me show you a picture of a handsome guy whom I think that most of you know him. Right. I'm sure you know that this is a famous character from Iron Man. Does the name Tony Stark sound familiar to you? Okay, this is Tony Stark, if you have forgotten or you don't know. He is the protagonist in the movie Iron Man. And for those of you who have watched this movie, you can notice that Tony Stark is the one and only hero that could fight his enemies, especially the main antagonist, who is Obadiah Stane, his father's old partner and his company's manager. Okay, let's move on to the second type of protagonist. It is known as, or it is called as, group heroes. So the group heroes, I'm referring to the second one. Okay. The group heroes are more than one person, and they work together to achieve the same goal or goals at the end of the story. Their goal is to resolve the conflict that they have in common. Okay, let's take a look at one example. The characters from Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. Okay, these two characters are considered protagonists since these two characters are the focus of the story. Both share the same goal, which is to overcome the obstacles that they face in their relationship. Both families are enemies, and their love for one another would never be allowed by their families. In the end of the story, we can see that the two protagonists face the same obstacle in their love life, which is their family and their love. So these two characters are considered to be the group heroes. The third type of protagonist is known as the anti-hero. This is the evil protagonist who has bad characteristics like selfishness, nastiness, hatefulness, arrogance, etc. You can notice that the anti-hero shows development in the character, and usually at the end of the movie, the anti-hero is usually rejected by society or experiencing self-destruction or self-repentance. Okay, let me give you one example of the anti-hero character. Okay, take a look at this photo. I'm sure you know her. Okay. The famous Maleficent in the movie known as Maleficent. During the exposition plot, the character of Maleficent is introduced as a young fairy who falls in love with a human boy named Stefan. But when her love is betrayed, she turns into a vengeful and heartless fairy. So Maleficent is the protagonist, but she's not the good protagonist. So her character is known as the anti-hero. Let's proceed to the second important character, that is the antagonist. So an antagonist is a person who has the opposite goal from the protagonist's goal. Usually the antagonist is a bad person in the movie. There are 4 types of antagonists that you need to know. Okay, the first one is known as a villain. This is the character who is evil and goes against the protagonist. The villain antagonist gives obstacles to the protagonist to achieve the goals, and the protagonist needs to find the solutions to overcome the antagonist. Let me give you an example. Let's take a look at this character. this is Harry Potter's enemy, and his name is Lord Voldemort. Lord Voldemort kills Harry Potter's parents and keeps trying to kill Harry Potter. So his objective is totally different from Harry Potter's objective in this movie. His burning hatred of Harry Potter makes him create challenges that Harry Potter needs to overcome. The second type of antagonist is known as the conflict creator. This is the character who is not evil, but he or she has a direct conflict with the protagonist. Let's take a look at example. One example taken from a classic movie known as Pride and Prejudice. This is the character who is not evil, but she has a direct conflict with the protagonist. So this picture shows Mrs. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, and she is the protagonist's mother. The name of the protagonist is Elizabeth, and Mrs. Bennet could be considered to be the conflict creator since she forces Elizabeth to marry a rich man whom she is not fond of. Her life goal is different from what Elizabeth has in mind, and this creates a conflict between them. The third type of antagonist is known as an inanimate force. So let's take a look what is an inanimate force. This type of antagonist is not a human. It can be an animal, a supernatural, or an entity like the character, the shark in the movie Jaws. Right, let me show you the picture of the inanimate force in the movie Jaws. So the shark is the antagonist. The protagonist needs to find ways in fighting the inanimate force, and at the end of the story, the winning party can be either side, but usually the protagonist wins. The last type of antagonist is known as an internal antagonist. This is the antagonist character that arises within the protagonist himself or herself. Let me show you one example of a character who has an internal antagonist even though he is the protagonist in the movie. Right, as you can see that this is the picture or the photo of the Grinch. The character the Grinch is the bad protagonist, or known as the anti-hero, as we have discussed earlier. So the Grinch is known to be nasty, grumpy, and sarcastic. Somehow, the Grinch faces an internal conflict in himself when he starts to enjoy the celebration of Christmas with the Who family. So this is the internal antagonist that the evil protagonist, the Grinch, faces. The next character is the love interest. This is the character whom the protagonist falls in love with. The role makes the protagonist more motivated to achieve the goal or to go through challenges. The role inspires the protagonist to move on in all plots. For example, let's take a look at one character of love interest in the movie Titanic. Have you watched this movie? Who do you think is the love interest character in this movie? It is Jack. Jack is the love interest of Rose, who is the protagonist in this movie. Jack makes Rose happy again in her life by enjoying the surroundings. He inspires Rose to appreciate life and to be what she wants to be. Another interesting love interest character that I'd like to share with you is the character of Anna Scott, played by Julia Roberts in a movie entitled Notting Hill. This 1999 movie is about William Tucker, played by Richard Gere, sells travel books in Notting Hill, London, and he falls in love with a famous American actress who happens to walk into his small bookshop. Anna's character makes the protagonist's character to move on and to overcome the obstacles that he faces in their relationship. So it shows to us that love interest character plays a significant role in the protagonist's life. Last but not least, one example of a love interest character is Edward in a movie entitled Pretty Woman. Edward, who is played by Richard Gere, is a wealthy businessman, and in this movie he falls in love with Vivian, the protagonist. So Vivian is played by Julia Roberts, and she is a hooker in this movie. So when Edward hires her to stay with him, she is not well accepted by the society around her. However, because of her love for Edward, she braves herself to change and to face the hurdles that come during their relationship. The protagonist is the second important main character who drives all plots to develop. This character can support or oppose the protagonist in achieving the goals. There are three types of protagonist. So the first one is known as the sidekick. This is the character who is the protagonist's best friend or assistant. For example, let's take a look at this photo. This is the sidekick in the movie. Okay, his name is Samwise Gamgee, if you have watched the Lord of the Rings series. At the beginning of the movie, he is the protagonist's assistant, and as the plots develop, you can notice that Samwise becomes Frodo Baggins' best friend, who is a loyal, dependable, and protective sidekick. So, Samwise Gamgee is a protagonist in this movie, and he is the sidekick, okay, because he is Frodo's best friend. The second one, or the second type of protagonist, is known as the love interest. I'm sure by now you should know what the love interest is, because we just discussed the role of the love interest earlier. And in the protagonist, okay, the character can also be the love interest. So as the love interest, Okay, the deuteragonist can also be the second main character whom the protagonist falls in love with. Okay, let's take an example. Right, this is taken from the movie Iron Man, and the character is Pepper Potts. Okay. Virginia Pepper Potts, that is the name given, okay, to this character, okay, who is the love interest of Iron Man. So she is Tony Stark's assistant, and during the development of all the plots, they both developed romantic feelings for each other. So she plays a significant role in making all the plots move forward, and she gives a strong push to the protagonist to solve the conflict. The third type of deuteragonist is known as the antagonist. So we discussed earlier on what antagonist is. So in deuteragonist, okay, we can also have an antagonist. So there is an overlapping of the types in the character that you can have in the movie. So this character is the villain in the movie, but it is the second most important character. So the antagonist creates challenges for the protagonist since they both have opposite goals. For example, this is taken from a famous movie, a thriller known as Misery. So this is Annie Wilkes, the insane vein of the protagonist, Paul Sheldon. In this movie, Annie Wilkes is seen as the second most important character, and her evil character managed to push the protagonist to be a fighter to survive. The fifth main type of movie character is the mentor, who is also known as the guardian. This character guides the protagonist with his or her knowledge of physical training or wisdom, since he or she has more experience. The mentor is the role model to the protagonist, and the protagonist respects and believes him or her. For example, in the Harry Potter series, Professor Dumbledore is Harry Potter's mentor. He shares his knowledge and experiences with Harry Potter, and he guides and advises him with his wisdom. As you can see from the movie, Harry Potter learns a lot from him, and this makes Harry respect and care for him. So, Professor Dumbledore is a mentor to Harry Potter. Another example of a mentor is Gandalf. Okay, this is the picture of Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings. So in the series of the Fellowship of the Ring. So he is also a mentor. Okay, and another one is in the movie The Karate Kid. And this character is Mr. Miyagi, who also plays as a mentor for the protagonist.